Good day, everyone. I am Mara Vanessa Jordan, and for the next topic is the pioneers of the cognitive revolution. For the outline of this report, we are going to know who were the people behind the cognitive revolution and the prominent people who contributed greatly in this period. We have Albert Bandura, Albert Ellis, Aaron Beck, George Miller, Jerome Bruner, Ulrich Nasser, and Noam Chomsky. After this report, we should be able to identify the pioneers of the cognitive revolution. So, Albert Bandura is an influential social cognitive psychologist who is probably best known for his social learning theory, the idea of self efficacy, and his famous Bobodal experiments. Albert Bandura was born in the small town of Mundere in northern Alberta, Canada, on December 4, 1925. He went to a small school that was both elementary and high school. After he graduated from high school, he worked one summer in the Yukon filling holes on the Alaskan Highway. And in year 1949, he went to the University of British Columbia and got his bachelor's degree in psychology. He went on to get his MA degree in 1951 and PhD in 1952 from the University of Iowa. There, the behaviorist tradition and learning theory had a big impact on him. So, he became and is an important player in the cognitive revolution and a clinical psychologist trained in behaviorism who had contributed a great deal to the application of behaviorism to psychopathology. He argued that people's beliefs about their ability to execute the behaviors necessary to control important events, which is called the self efficacy beliefs, are crucial in determining people's well being. His theory on social learning put emphasis on the importance of observational learning, imitation, and modeling. He said that people would have a hard time learning and it could be dangerous if they had to rely on the results of their own actions to tell them what to do. His theory took into account how behaviors, thoughts, and the environment are always interacting with each other. Now, of the hundreds of studies Bandura was responsible for, one group stands out above the others, which is the Bobodal studies. Now, the Bobodal study was important because it went against behaviorism, which says that reinforcement or rewards control all behavior. Bandura's work shows how important social influences are, but also how important it is to believe in your personal control. Now, Bandura's work is regarded as part of the late 1960s cognitive revolution in psychology as his theories influenced personality psychology, cognitive psychology, education, and psychotherapy. The next one is Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis, the oldest of three children, was born on September 27, 1913, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Albert Ellis was a well known New York City clinical psychologist. Ellis discovered his desire to work as a therapist in his late 20s when friends frequently sought his advice and he realized how much he enjoyed assisting them. Now, in the year 1943, he earned a master's degree in clinical psychology from Columbia University, and soon after, in 1947, he earned his doctorate. He argued that people prone to psychological disorders are plagued by irrational negative assumptions about themselves and the world. By year 1956, he presented his approach called rational psychotherapy, and now it is called the rational emotive behavior therapy. And Ellis started a type of therapy in which he confronted his patients with the beliefs or behaviors that could be making their lives hard and help them replace this with new ones. So Ellis was the first person to use cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, and this is where rational emotional behavior therapy or REBT was born. So in short, this method emphasized a more direct and active approach to therapy in which the therapist help the client understand the irrational beliefs that lead to emotional and psychological distress. With this, he is frequently regarded as one of the most distinguished psychologists in history. Now, while rational emotional behavioral therapy is frequently labeled uh, as an offshoot of the CBT or the cognitive behavioral therapy, Ellis's work was actually part of the cognitive revolution, and he helped establish and pioneer cognitive behavioral therapies. Now, moving on to the next pioneer or the next person is Aaron Beck or Aaron Beck. Now, Aaron Temkin Beck is known as the founder of cognitive therapy, or sometimes known as the cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. Now, he was born in the Providence, Rhode Island on July 18, 1921. He was the youngest child of five, and in year 1942, Beck graduated from Bourne University with degrees in English and political science. In 1946, he received his medical degree from Yale University. He began his work in psychology by employing a psychoanalytic method. He discovered new thoughts and ideas that eventually led to the establishment of cognitive behavioral therapy after completing study on depression. It was when, after assuming a position in the psychiatry department at the University of Pennsylvania, where he established a depression research clinic, his focus turned on the cognitive method and his research in this area expanded. Soon, he turned his focus to assisting patients in identifying these negative automatic thoughts and replacing them with more realistic and correct ones. So, as to lessen the distorted thought patterns that contributed to depression. Now, he discovered that the key to successfully treating any condition was making patients aware of these negative thought patterns. This therapeutic approach ultimately became known as the cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. That's why he is considered the founder of the cognitive therapy. Aaron Beck's research led to a lot of new ideas in the field of psychology. He has been called one of the five most influential psychotherapists of all time and one of the Americans in history who changed the face of American psychiatry. Through his work, he has made a big difference in the field of mental health. Before he did his research, most people had never heard of CBT. Now, research shows that it's one of the best ways to treat a wide range of mental health problems. The next person that we're going to discuss is George Miller. I'm sorry for the background noise. Okay, continuation. George Armitage Miller is known as the father of cognitive science. Because of his work in the field, he was an American psychologist who was one of the founders of both cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. Um, he was born on February 3, 1920 in Charleston, West Virginia. He also made important changes on the fields of psycholinguistics and the study of how people talk. One of Miller's most well-known discoveries was that a person's short-term memory can only hold about 7 things, plus or minus 2. Now, Miller wrote a famous paper in year 1956 called The Magical Number 7, plus or minus 2, Some Limits on Our Capacity to Process Information. In it, he said that humans can only effectively process no more than 7 units or chunks of information, plus or minus 2 pieces of information at any given time. So, this limit applied to short-term memory and a number of other mental processes, like being able to tell the difference between different sounds and see things at a glance. In the year 1960, He co-founded and co-directed the Center for Cognitive Studies at Harvard with Jerome Bruner. So who is Jerome Bruner? Jerome Seymour Bruner was an American psychologist and educator. He was born on October 1, 1915 in New York and is one of the founders of cognitive revolution. His theories about how young children perceive, learn, remember, and think about other things had an impact on the American education system and helped start the field of cognitive psychology. So, Brunner was a big part of leading the cognitive revolution, which started in the 1950s to replace behaviorism. Brunner said that the goal of this revolution was to find and formally describe the meanings that people made out of their interaction with the world, and then to make suggestions about what meaning making processes were at work. So it looked at how people use symbolic actions to build and make sense of not only the world, but also themselves. He thought that the focus had moved from the construction of meaning to the processing of information. He thought that using a computer as a metaphor was too limiting and didn't take into account rather how culture shapes our thoughts and the words we use to express them. He also stressed the importance of teaching children basic structure over facts because it gives them the tools to actively take part in the search for knowledge. He also made the controversial claim that any subject can be taught well to children at any stage of development if it is presented in the right way. So Brunner suggested that the representational system children use as they develop closely parallel the history of the human individuals. Now, the next one is Ulrich Neisser. So, Ulrich Richard Gustav Neisser is known as the father of cognitive psychology. He was born on December 8, 1928, in Kiel, Germany. Neisser was never a fan of behaviorism because he thought that the approach's basic ideas were wrong, and because those ideas limited what psychologists could study. So, in cognitive psychology, he didn't directly criticize behaviorism. Instead, he showed a better way to think about things. He was actually called the father of cognitive psychology because in year 1967, he put forward the first unified theory of how the mind works and published it as the first textbook called Cognitive Psychology. Neisser's research was mostly about how people perceive, remember, learn, and think. He held that memory, perception, and other internal thought processes could be studied and measured. So, he was the first one who coined the term cognitive psychology. So, he was credited or he was considered as the father of cognitive psychology. So, lastly, we have Noam Chomsky. Avram Noam Chomsky is an American philosopher and linguist. He is often referred to as the father of modern linguistics. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on December 7, 1928. He is an American theoretical linguist whose work from 1950s changed the field of linguistics by looking at language as a uniquely human cognitive ability that is based on biology. So, Chomsky's work in linguistics and other related fields, such as cognitive psychology and the philosophy of mind and language, helped start and keep going what became known as the cognitive revolution. He thought that psychology's focus on behavior was too narrow and that the field needed to focus on how the mind works again if it wanted to make any real progress in understanding behavior. So, even though he is not a psychologist, you can't ignore, or we can't ignore, what he has to say about psychology. His main area of work is linguistics. But since 1959, when he wrote a review of Skinner's book titled Verbal Behavior, his ideas have shaped the way psychologists study behavior. So in Skinner book, uh, his first thought was that language is just a learned behavior and therefore a set of responses to different things. This was in line with the behaviorism, which was one of the most popular types of psychology at that time. Then Chomsky, on the other hand, he said that language is innate and that it develops when outside factors make it necessary. He pointed out that children learn language quickly, which doesn't make sense with how they act, and that language is a unique trait that only humans have. Both sides said that language is partly determined by genes. So Chomsky stated that while some mental processes are measurable, it is virtually impossible to adequately establish what determines how an individual perceives, remembers, thinks, or solves problems. Um, he is also a supporter of the modularity, a theory that sees the mind as a collection of separate subsystems instead of one big system that can use any cognitive processes on any data it receives. Though, this theory it helps explain some things that were unclear before on that time. So, to sum it all up, in the 1950s, there was a philosophical shift in psychology known as the cognitive revolution, which emphasized the importance of the individual's thought processing in shaping their actions. By focusing on processing abilities like learning a new language, remembering things, and solving problems, the study of human cognition expanded into other fields. This method of scientific inquiry into the brain's operation has shifted away from behavioral psychology and toward a focus on the underlying systems that determine behavior. And in the year 1950s and 1960s, during an intellectual era known as the Cognitive Revolution, cognitive psychology emerged as the dominant division of the psychological discipline. A number of influential scholars, including as Albert Bandura, Albert Ellis, Aaron Beck, George Miller, Jerome Bruner, Ulrich Nasser, and Noam Chomsky, laid the groundwork for the cognitive revolution. So, again, Bandura came up with the idea of self-efficacy and the social learning theory. These ideas have had a huge impact on social cognitive, developmental, educational, and clinical psychology. Ellis is best known for REBT, which led to the cognitive behavioral therapy. So his rational emotive behavioral therapy tries to directly address problematic beliefs that leads to self-defeating behaviors. Beck, meanwhile, was a psychiatrist at the University of Pennsylvania in the early 1960s when he came up with the idea of cognitive therapy. He set up and ran a number of experiments to test psychoanalytic ideas about depression. Now, Miller realized that an information processing model can be used to understand how the mind works. His ideas helped psychology move beyond the behaviorist methods that were used most often in the 1950s. Bruner's theory of cognitive development was different from other stage based theories of cognitive because it is said that even young children can learn hard ideas with the right help. Next one is Nasser. He is known as the father of cognitive psychology because he challenged behaviorist theory and he tried to figure out how the mind thinks and works. He was especially interested in how people remember and understand things. Chomsky, lastly, our last pioneer, was an American theoretical linguist whose work from the 1950s changed the field of linguistics by looking at language as a uniquely human cognitive ability that is based on biology. Okay, so that would be all. Thank you for listening. Good day.